Have you ever felt like opening up, only to realize some people just aren't meant to hear your pain? In today's video, we're diving into exactly who you should never reveal your struggles to, and why protecting your emotional energy is so crucial. If you're someone who wants to understand the mind, human behavior, and the psychology behind our choices, this video is a must-watch. And don't forget, subscribe to this channel to catch daily lessons on psychology that will empower you to navigate life smarter and stronger. The hidden wound of survival through emotional concealment, where silence once kept you safe, but now quietly costs you intimacy, authenticity, and rest. Someone who learned early that vulnerability was dangerous, inconvenient, or ignored, and therefore turned pain into a private language no one else was allowed to hear. Never reveal your pain to these people. Part 1. High-impact hook and core paradox. You learned how to carry pain quietly. Not because you were strong, not because you were mature, but because at some point, being seen hurt more than being silent. Maybe it happened early. A moment where you reached out, emotionally, honestly, and were met with dismissal, or mockery, or indifference. So you adapted. Now, you move through the world composed, functional, capable. People describe you as calm, grounded, resilient. They say things like, you handle things so well. But what they don't see is the tension you hold in your jaw when you're alone. The way your chest tightens when emotions rise too close to the surface. The instinct, automatic, immediate, to retreat inward the moment pain appears. You don't hide because you want to. You hide because your nervous system learned that exposure equals danger. And here is the paradox. The silence that once protected you is now the thing slowly starving you. Because pain that is never witnessed does not disappear. It calcifies. It becomes identity. You stop asking for help, not because you don't need it, but because you no longer believe it will come. And somewhere along the way, secrecy stops being a choice and becomes a reflex. Part 2. Definition and psychological authority. This pattern is not a personality trait. It is a trauma adaptation. In psychology, this behavior often emerges from emotional neglect, not necessarily abuse, but something quieter and more corrosive. Being unseen when you needed to be seen. When a child learns that expressing distress results in dismissal, burdening others, or emotional withdrawal, the nervous system recalibrates. Pain becomes unsafe. Let's ground this in 3 key psychological concepts. 1. Emotional neglect schema. This schema forms when emotional needs are consistently unmet. The child learns, my feelings don't matter, or worse, my feelings are a problem. So they internalize self-reliance as survival. They stop signaling distress, because signals go unanswered. 2. Avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment doesn't mean you don't feel deeply. It means you learned to deactivate emotional needs to maintain connection. You don't lean in. You pull back. You intellectualize instead of feel. Intimacy becomes threatening, not because you don't want it, but because closeness once came with emotional cost. 3. Hypervigilance. Your nervous system becomes constantly alert, scanning for signs that vulnerability might be punished. You monitor your tone, your expressions, your emotional volume. You become excellent at emotional self-containment. But the body keeps the score. Your default mode network, the brain's background operating system, becomes wired around restraint instead of expression. And over time, silence becomes your identity. Part 3. Emotional cost and philosophical weight. Carl Jung once said, what is denied in oneself is projected onto others. When pain is never allowed expression, it doesn't vanish. It mutates. It becomes irritability without cause, fatigue without explanation, loneliness even in rooms full of people. This is invisible grief. You grieve the version of yourself that could have been softer, needier, more openly human. But you learned early that authenticity had consequences. So you traded truth for tolerance, expression for acceptance, depth for safety, and the core fear underneath it all, the fear of being a burden, the fear that your pain will make others withdraw, the fear that if you reveal too much, you'll be left holding it alone, again. This fear infiltrates ordinary moments. You hesitate before speaking. You minimize your experiences. You say, I'm fine, when you're anything but. And over time, you don't just hide pain from others. You hide it from yourself. As Seneca warned, we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. But when pain is never shared, imagination becomes your only witness. Part 4. Adult manifestation and the unlearning process. These patterns don't disappear in adulthood. They evolve. You might notice it in relationships. You become the listener, never the sharer. You attract emotionally unavailable partners because distance feels familiar. You struggle to ask for reassurance, even when you desperately need it. In your career, you overfunction. You take on more than is sustainable. You equate worth with usefulness. In self-worth, you feel valuable only when you're composed. You judge yourself harshly for emotional needs. You confuse independence with isolation. In boundaries, you allow emotional access without reciprocity. You say it's okay when it isn't. You abandon yourself to avoid conflict. In emotional regulation, you intellectualize instead of feel. You numb through productivity, scrolling, or distraction. You experience delayed emotional responses, breaking down only when alone. In identity, you don't know how much of you is authentic and how much is adaptation. But here is the crucial reframe. These are coping mechanisms, not character flaws. And healing does not begin with self-criticism. It begins with witnessing. You don't gaslight yourself out of pain. You learn to stay with it. Part 5. Healing, conclusion, and affirmation. 3 to 4 minutes. Healing does not mean oversharing. It means selective truth. It means learning that not everyone deserves access to your inner world, but someone should. Here are grounded pathways forward. Inner child reparenting. You begin offering yourself the validation you never received. You respond to your own pain with presence instead of dismissal. Shadow work. You explore the parts of you labeled too much and reclaim them as human. Nervous system regulation. Through breath work, somatic awareness, and stillness, you teach your body that vulnerability no longer equals danger. Choosing softness over survival. You practice resting without guilt, expressing without apology, needing without shame. Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "The purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things." Your pain is not weakness. It is information. And the goal is not to be fixed, but to become whole. You don't need to reveal your pain to everyone, but you are allowed to stop carrying it alone. If this spoke to something quiet inside you, consider sharing it with someone who might feel the same. And if you want to continue exploring the psychology of healing, stay here. This space was made for people like you, the ones who survived silently and are finally learning to speak. Part 6. Discernment. Who you must never reveal your pain to. Not all silence is repression, and not all sharing is healing. One of the most dangerous lies trauma teaches is that if vulnerability hurts, vulnerability itself must be wrong. That isn't true. The truth is more precise and more uncomfortable. Your pain was never unsafe. Some people were. So let's speak clearly now. There are people in your life who do not hold pain. They consume it. People who turn your vulnerability into leverage. Entertainment. Superiority. You must never reveal your pain to those who minimize your emotions with logic instead of empathy. Offer advice when presence is required. Become uncomfortable when the focus is not on them. Weaponize your honesty during conflict. Require you to be okay so they can remain comfortable. These individuals are not evil, but they are emotionally unsafe. And here is where discernment replaces silence. You are not learning to open indiscriminately. You are learning to choose wisely. In psychology, this is called earned security, the ability to assess relational safety before emotional exposure. Your nervous system must learn a new rule. I don't reveal my pain to be accepted. I reveal it where it can be metabolized. Silence was your shield. Now discernment becomes your compass. Part 7. Integration. Becoming someone who no longer hides. There will come a moment, quiet, unannounced, when you realize something has changed. You still feel pain, but you no longer disappear inside it. You notice the urge to withdraw, and instead of obeying it, you pause. You breathe. You ask yourself a new question. What would self-betrayal look like right now? And you choose differently. Integration is not dramatic. It is subtle, daily, almost boring. It looks like naming emotions before they harden into tension, asking for help without justifying the request, letting someone see you before you collapse, trusting your body's signals instead of overriding them. This is what it means to leave survival mode. You stop living as a closed system, and something extraordinary happens when pain is finally allowed circulation. It softens. Not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer alone inside yourself. The version of you who hid was never weak. They were brilliant. They kept you alive, but they were never meant to keep you isolated. And now, you are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to be complex, selective, open, and protected at the same time. This is emotional adulthood. And if you are here, listening to this, it means the silence has already begun to loosen its grip. You don't need to expose everything. You don't need to perform healing. You only need to stop disappearing. Because the most radical thing you can do now is let yourself be seen by the right eyes, in the right moments, at the pace your nervous system can sustain. And that is not weakness. That is wisdom.